Thank you, Monisha. I think this is a fantastic initiative that you've taken. You've been doing some incredible work, and I think the world also needs to know about all the great work that you've been doing. I actually grew up in a small town in Bengal called Kharagpur, although my genes are from Rajasthan. And I think grew up in a small campus town, seeing, IIT all around me. I wanted to go there, and that's what I did. Graduated, went to the US, and around 2000 was when the Human Genome Project was just getting completed. So it sounded fascinating. I think there were many other things that we were trying to start at that time, but this just seemed too interesting to sort of not do it, right? And this is, I think, for people who don't have a track of what time this is before Google was even released and all of that, right? So it is around that same time. So I thought it was fascinating. We said it's good enough for us to be able to give up everything that we have and start something in this space, because maybe it was something that could keep us engaged, keep our minds engaged for a long period of time. So I think we started with that. That was my first company, called Awesome Bio. And we moved back from Chicago to Hyderabad, and we began the first company, started Awesome Bio Solutions. And over a period of time, I think Awesome went through a very interesting journey. We ended up acquiring 3 companies across the world, one in Netherlands, one in Germany, and one in the US. And we became one of the largest, genomic services companies. At that time, I think there wasn't much happening on the clinical side of, there was not that much genetics being used. There wasn't definitely no genetics being used from a wellness or a prevention point of view, for sure. So we started doing this, and because earlier we were mostly working with the large pharmaceutical and biotechs and all of that, I think there was sort of this feeling that, we are not able to help the people around us. And that, while you might be doing great work that ultimately might be useful for humanity, it was something that you felt that your next door neighbor might not benefit out of all the technology that maybe you've been working on. You've been processing large number of samples, but does that really help the average person? So I think that was where I first, thought that maybe we need to do something that can go directly to the consumer, educate them. And in 2013, started another company called Mapmygenome. We started with a very simple concept, right? And that was that how do we get consumers to be aware that, their health is in their own hands, and the more they know, that they can actually take certain actions based on that health.
This is a subject which is very close to my heart, and I think you would, you would know by now why, right? Because my own daughter, my youngest daughter, is suffering from a very rare genetic disorder, right? I had no idea about what a gene testing meant in the lay language, or a genetic screening means, how it can help, and it's something that has, sort of dawned on me in very recent times. Okay, just when I was looking for answers in terms of why is it that we are not being able to talk about prevention when it came to rare diseases. That's how the whole subject of genetic screening actually came up in my life, at least. So everybody understands, every listener who's listening to us understands this space a little better. What is it in the most lay language that you do, right? And when you said that your services were not reaching the people around you, what exactly do you mean by that?
So I think we'll start with the real problem. For instance, that someone like you would have been benefited if you knew about this earlier, right? So let's take somebody who is in the preconception stage. They're planning to have a baby, and you are trying to see if there is a possibility that certain mutations can cause a particular problem in a child, right? Or the offspring that you are trying to create. So what you would do is that all of us are made out of, we have an instruction book in every cell of our body called the DNA, where you're looking at 23 pairs of chromosomes, and then, one of each is like one set of instructions from your mom and one set of instructions from your dad is sort of passed on to the offspring. Now, what we can do before people plan to have a baby is that you can actually test for certain mutations, right? Now, mutations are of many different kinds, And let me focus on the ones that are probably one of the most important, right? For instance, they're called as the single nucleotide polymorphisms. So take any two human beings, you and me, we'll be 99.9% alike, right? There'll be a lot of similarity in between you and me, but there are going to be some differences. And that would be your differences in that code that is there, the 0.1% difference. Now, what happens is that in many cases, you might be a perfectly healthy individual, but you might be carrying a mutation, which, as long as it is just a single mutation, the chances of it, passing it to the child are less. So when they are recessive genes, it's what you call, then you might be a perfectly healthy person. Your partner might be a perfectly healthy person. But if the both of them have a baby, then if they have the exact same mutation, the chances that the baby has that will to pass on and actually become a problem or a disease, that will increase, right? So when you do a preconception matching, or what we call as the Mapmygenome in this case, what we are doing is we are saying that we take all the data that comes for the mother, take all the data that comes from the father, and we're going to match it and see, are there any common mutations that are there that are likely to impact the child, right? That's what you would do in the beginning, so you can find out if there are certain things that you are able to figure that out. That is one part of what you can do. The second thing is that let's say that the parents decide to go ahead, have a baby in any way, right? Once you have a baby, you have the baby is there in the mother is carrying the baby. There are many tests that are there that can help you understand if there are any chromosomal abnormalities, or if there are any mutational there are certain things that you can find out. So the easiest test that they typically do would be what they call as the NIPT test these days, right? So that's a non-invasive prenatal testing. And what you do over there is that you are checking to see if sometimes, like I mentioned, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? Each chromosome, let's say chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each one of them comes with two chromosomes each. But in some cases, like an 18 or a 21 and so on, you might have an extra chromosome, or you might have a less chromosome, right? So these are called as what they call as the wrong, like aneuploidies, or differences in terms of the number of chromosomes that you have. And that can potentially lead to certain genetic disorders. And you can find this out either using a karyotype of the parents, or you're looking at NIPT, which I was talking about. You can find out if there is something that is there that the parents need to be aware that the baby is likely to have.
Out of these two methods, so what I'm understanding, if I had to further simplify it, is that either you test yourself as a carrier for various abnormal conditions, either before conception or after conception, when you are in that phase of pregnancy, right, carrying the child. Out of these two methods, which is the safest? But if you ask me, I would say obviously before conception, right?
Yeah,
or do you feel one has more advantage than the other in some way?
No, so they're also slightly different in terms of what you're looking for. When I'm doing a preconception testing, I'm just checking if I have a mutation, right? Let's say I have a mutation for G6PD or a phenylketonuria or a thalassemia or otherwise. I might be a carrier and lead a perfectly healthy life. But, the baby, someone who has a baby, if both the partners have it, then the chances of the baby getting it become 1/4 or more, right? So that becomes that's something that the parents need to be aware of. Now, once they're aware, they can always decide to go ahead with it or not go ahead with it. But you're managing their expectations at that point of time, right? You know that there is a chance you can still have a perfectly healthy baby, but there's a chance that you might have that, right? So the preconception is you are assessing, you do counseling for these parents and help them understand that what are the chances that they're likely to pass this on to an offspring. When you're doing it in the NIPT test that I mentioned, that is more where you're saying that chromosomal abnormalities that are there, like a Down syndrome or any of these other things that you'll find. And here what you're getting is an extra chromosome that is likely to come in, right? So you're looking at it more from a more macro level. You're adding an extra chromosome or a less chromosome and so on. So I think they're slightly different, but I think both are valuable, because if you find something while they are in the womb, then you know that the baby is affected, right?
Right.
If you find something, and then you decide before the 22 weeks or 24 weeks that whether you want to keep the baby or not. So it depends.
Right.
I think ultimately it's a very personal decision.
So I know in my case, honestly speaking, I have two be daughters, and I'll probably just fall back on my own case as a reference. My eldest had no issues, whatsoever. It was a pretty regular, pregnancy, normal childbirth, etc. She till date she's healthy, and I don't have any complaints with the eldest. But in case of my youngest, right, and her name is Kia. So when Kia was conceived, uh, there was bleeding, post conception. That was one thing that we noticed. We went through all clear for all the prenatal tests for Down syndrome, etc., etc. So none of any abnormalities were noticed for her. But there was bleeding. The fetus growth had slowed down in the eighth month, for which I was put on bed rest. There were no tests that were known that could be done to figure out why. Eventually, it was a normal childbirth, but she came out, and I think within 10 months, she was diagnosed with the rare disease, because you had, developmental delays, right? And mostly physical development delays. Any test that you can think of that could have been included in that list of prenatal tests, right? At that point of time, do you think anything could have been done as an early intervention? Because at that time there was no cure or no preventive line of treatment even for this kind of a rare disease, right? But today there is, and I know that
So
internationally, post conception, during the prenatal, they do screening for rare diseases as well. What's your take on that?
obviously, I think if you did the preconception thing, it's an easier thing to understand, because you can at least figure out if there's a possibility of that passing to your child. And I think the fact that you did not have the first child was healthy, I think obviously you had no reason to even suspect that. Nowadays we are finding a lot more couples that, at least those who are aware, they say that we want to do this to just screen out any possibilities. Now when they are from related families like consanguineous marriages, the chances of that mutation being there in both the parents is very likely, right? Because if you are related, the chances of the mutations are common, and therefore you're likely to pass it on to the child. So typically, I think if they are related, I would 100% suggest that they actually do this kind of a screening, because it really will help them over for the rest of their lives. That is one. The second is that you can now do a lot more prenatal tests as well compared to what you could do earlier. So I think definitely lots have changed. I think even since the time that I had my kids, which was a long time back, there are definitely a lot more things that have changed. And I think today the technology is there for everyone to use, and relatively cost effective to be able to use it. So I would urge for people, especially those where there is a family history or they've heard of something in the extended family, I think, to at least be able to go and find out if there is something that they can do about it.
Absolutely. Very honestly speaking, I can't, help but second that, because, when I married somebody who's not related to my family from any angle. There has been no history of any rare disease in the family, etc. So what I've understood in my 13 years journey with this rare disease in my child is that the rate of incidence has increased. That is point number one. I'm not sure why. The number of carriers, they say, are very, very high. And I'm just limiting myself to spinal muscular atrophy because that's what we are dealing with in my family. They say 1 in 40 people who are walking the planet Earth are carriers. So you could imagine that these 1 in 40 people don't really have to be related in a particular family or through their families only. So there are ample number of carriers in the society around us. And I think it's only safe that, without waiting for one to conceive a child and then test if that child carries an abnormality, because then the only option is whether you want to have the child or not have the child, right? That's going to be like terminating a life.
Correct.
I think the safest way would always be to prevent by doing a preconception test, right? We have this option to do it today. You can always keep a genetic, report card, and it's a once in a lifetime. You don't have to repeat these tests again and again. It's not like annual health checkup that you need to do, right? Should you plan to have a family, match it with your, with your partner that you're planning to have your family with, grow your family with, and there you go. You have a solution to figuring out which alternative way of having a child that you want to go about. And there are lots of ways of conceiving a child today. What are the types of tests that somebody like me, right? If I was in an age where I could conceive a child or wanted to grow my family, what are the kinds of tests that I could go in for in today's day and age?
So definitely, I think carrier screening is one, and there can be two types of carrier screening, right? One can be a one that are commonly, if cost is a challenge, then I think there are smaller versions of that can be done. So you might not screen for all the 6,000 possibilities, but you can do a smaller one, especially the ones that are fairly common. Like you mentioned, that SMA is quite common in India also, right? So if it is that common, that thalassemia and a few other things, I think it's important to be able to at least screen for those kind of tests that that are likely. They are quite, even though they are classified as rare diseases, they are sort of quite common, right? So that is number one. The ideal would be to be able to do an extended carrier screening for everyone, which would be basically looking at all the 6,000 markers. So you do like a whole sequencing of your exonic part of your genome. So that is typically what we would do. So it's an exome sequencing based platform, and you do that, and you can have that in many ways, like you match your horoscopes. I think you can match that, because ultimately I think that's what will shows the compatibility in the genetic sense, right? You can see if there's something that you're passing on or not. So that would be an extended carrier screening that I think is a very important part of what is done. The second is what we were discussing, which was like an NIPT or a karyotype and others that your OBGYN or others would recommend. And then there are the third part would be that once the baby is born, typically what hospitals are doing is they do a basic biochemistry test, right? So I'm sure as soon as your baby is born, they would have done like a heel prick test where they take a little blood sample from your baby's foot, and then they do a biochemistry test. There they're checking if there are anything abnormal, and based on that they recommend whether there is a genetic test that you want to do for the child or not. So similar to what we did for the adults, you can do a similar test for the newborn baby as well, and you can find out if there are anything from a genetic point of view that potentially can, either they have the disease right now or they might likely to develop it over the next few months, right? And typically a lot of them will happen over the first 1 or 2 3 years, and many of them are preventable as well, right? So some of them could just be some diet based intervention, like no proteins for certain cases, or otherwise there are certain types of foods that are allowed for them to be able to eat, and they lead a perfectly healthy life and so on. So some of them are easy to manage from a dietary or a lifestyle perspective, but there are others that would need interventions early, and the earlier intervention you can do, the better it is for the child.
So Anu, we were talking about which side of the coin one would like to choose, right? Whether prevention or let's say the cure for the rare disease specifically. Because in my case, if I had to further exemplify, Kia got diagnosed. Kia is my daughter, so she got diagnosed, and then for 10 years, there was no known line of treatment. And when something came out, was approved by US FDA, reached India, it turned out to be obnoxiously expensive. Like I, for example, have to, provide her a treatment worth 1 crore a year now for the rest of her life. That is where we are at that junction in life. And in our country, because of, the existing healthcare system being so behind, and the insurance sector not being comprehensive enough to include genetic disorders, etc. This kind of medical healthcare is, especially for rare disease treatment, is not covered. For that matter, any genetic condition is not covered. So the only method given to families like us is please go out there and crowdfund from the public of the country. So you can imagine how difficult that must be, because it's not a very common thing that people do, right? So that's what I keep telling people whenever we get a platform to talk about. And thankfully, last year we were able to gain the attention of a few corporates, because I come from that background, and I always believe that the corporate world has solutions which can support even those like us. We cannot be left out, because somewhere the corporate CSR policies have a huge emphasis on healthcare.
No, I think it is obviously very clear that once it is much more expensive, and also it also is in terms of your quality of life and your time and all of that. I think it's not just like you mentioned, it's a crore for the next few years or till. But it's also that you are also taking care of the baby, or you have to stay at home. There's a lot that goes in for the entire family, and I think nobody plans. Nobody is already aware that this is what they are going to go through. So I think it's important that if they can first do this kind of testing earlier, then they don't have to go through that both emotional as well as financial pain, right? So, and I think that's what is there, that currently the cost is also not that high for people to be worried about, like, how do I spend this kind of money and get these tests done. So I think it's important to be able to do that. And I think one of the things that we were thinking is that even within the the other tests that we do, which is genome patri, what we've started to do is to add about 10 or 15 of the common carriers, things that we can screen over there. And that sort of is quite very, very low price, so that people can actually do this without thinking much about it, and you're able to at least get a larger population to be able to do it. Even if you do the full extended carrier screening and all that, they are not that expensive anymore, right? So I think you'll be spending a ballpark of 30 to 40,000 rupees on an average for both the husband and wife, and then see what you want to do after that.
Right.
Compared to what you said, you end up spending, which would be a lot more for an average family that is there. And that too, you've been able to gather, after so many years, you've been able to gather a lot of people together. You build in a community, and therefore you're able to get at least some attention of some corporates. But
Absolutely.
if you can prevent this in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Better spend on prevention. That's what I have been literally barking about everywhere, that this is what I have to deal with. The only reason that I am out there talking to people today is that there should be fewer of people like us out there, right? Because somewhere I believe, in a country like ours, where healthcare is in general very inaccessible, insurance sector is so weak, prevention is the best cure. And I think 30,000-40,000 in today's day and age is not a big amount. Even if, let's say, if an organization, like for example, what am I doing today, Anu? I speak to corporates and I tell them that, every employee is given a corporate health cover, like a health insurance, right? I had it for the longest number of years that I was serving in the corporate side of the world, and it included blood tests, it included tests for HIV and every single thing, right? Just to ensure that you're employing a medically fit person within an organization to serve. And most of the employees can avail even this test as a part of their medical insurance, right? All we need is the employer, which is your organization, and the corporate insurance provider to come together and facilitate this. And imagine the amount of benefit that would come out of this whole association, right? So somewhere where an employee would think twice, where am I thinking about marriage? Kids are too far, etc. But this is a once in a lifetime test. Keep a record, keep it away with your insurance policies for all I care. And it is something that you fall back on only when you have to, right? Even if your little siblings in your family are going to get married, have children, and you know that you are a carrier, you can at least guide the next kin in your family that you might want to get yourself checked as well, since I have these mutations in my genes, for example. So lots of I think possibilities of preventing it down the line, even in your own family, right? Even if one member is able to get a genetic health report card of theirs and preserve it for records. The reason why we're targeting corporates is because they are more educated. It's easier to communicate, to make them understand. We have living examples. In fact, 80%, and this is just a statistics I want to share, 80% of the rare disease patients diagnosed in the country are actually from the urban population, purely because they understand that there are tests available. Diagnostics is anyway difficult in cities, right? So imagine if somebody from the villages came and was struggling. So most of the people diagnosed with rare diseases are actually from the urban population. And these are people who are either currently serving in organizations, or they've had to quit their roles in the organization and turn into full-time caregivers like myself. So this is one of the reasons it's been easier to talk to corporates, because if this was done with us, if there was somebody like, let's say, you or me talking about it back in my time, I would have been easily able to prevent this, right? Rather than having to buckle down the way that my life has been buckling, since the onset of a family member's condition. And I'm so happy, glad that we're talking today, because I will be carrying this message along with me wherever I go. And I hope more people come forward and do this with you, and with companies and organizations like you, which are making it available to customers. Yours is a very simple B2C model, but I think somewhere we need tie-ups with corporates. We need tie-ups with corporate insurance companies. Make this a part of a must-have in the list of those medical checkups, so that prevention becomes highly normalized. What are your plans as an organization? Anu, where is it that Mapmygenome is headed? What is your next plan?
So I think we've spoken a little bit about rare diseases and some of those that can be passed on to the next generation. But one of my other areas, and I think what we started off, is also just looking at individuals and how do you prevent rather than wait for even complex diseases, right? So one is that, can we do that? The other is that how do you get expecting parents to sort of understand, and whether it's rare, whether it's anything else, I think how do you convince them to be able to understand their genetic profiles and what to expect in the future. And so now we've been working not only with consumers, but we also work with doctors and hospitals to be able to communicate that to the end user. So ultimately, I think there are many new kinds of genetic testing methods that have come in, both in terms of microbiome and epigenetics and a lot of other things that are there. But I think the simplest is to say that, can we create these profiles for individuals? How do you give them the power of knowledge? Because even though there is a saying that says ignorance is bliss, it never is, right? I think because if you never know, you don't act upon it. When you don't know what's going on with your marks, for instance, in a student, then you are typically not doing something about it. If you don't know what is happening to your weight, you're probably not doing something about it. So there is clearly screening tests that are there. There's diagnostic tests. And then we are looking at a lot of things that can help you in optimizing your health span, is what we would say, right? So for instance, there are like your gut is full of different bacteria and fungi and others. So we can also sequence that, and that's also genomics, but it's a different kind of genomics. You're not just looking at the human, your own genetic code, but you're looking at signatures of the bacteria and fungi that are there. And that has a very clear correlation with disease. It has a clear correlation with your food and many other things. So right now you're finding a lot of correlation with disease and your gut that we are seeing. So that is one thing that we've been doing. The other also that we provide is what we call as the epigenetics, which basically means that your effect of your environment, and you spoke a little bit about some of the changes that have been happening in the environment, right? So you can understand what has actually happened in terms of the genome, with not just as the hereditary part that you inherited, but also things that might have changed due to your environment. So that is what we would call as the epigenome. And then there are diagnostic tests. There are tests that help you understand which medicines will work for you. Not every medicine works with the standard dosage, right? So you might be taking an average drug, but it might be fine for you. It might not be fine for me. right? And so we have people identify based on the FDA and the CPIC guidelines on which drugs are likely to work for you, which are not likely to work for you. And if they're not likely to work for you, what are the current evidence that we find across the different places, and where is that link to be able to understand that? So there are many things that you can do from a genetic analysis. There are fun things that you can do, which could be like understand where you came from, what your ethnicity is. You can also understand which beauty products to use. So, or which fitness activities will work for you. So there are some interesting, fun things that you can do. There are screening tests that you can do. There are tests that you can do from a treatment perspective. You can also look at it as something that currently, for instance, when you're diagnosed with cancer, how do you actually find out which therapy will work for you? And so I think genomics is quite vast. You want to make sure that, at least you focus in on the kind of things that you are currently interested in.
I think there's something for each one of us, it looks like, right? In
Right.
terms of whether it's food or, like you said, beauty
Yeah.
products or, medication, whatever one can take, one can't take, physical fitness, etc. The world of genomics is honestly, I think it's expanding, and eventually, what I've read and heard about is, I think the aim is the same. We are all looking at preventing anything which is not suitable for a humankind to, keep on recurring, right? And that's the whole idea of going back and trying to analyze what we are made up of. I know my honest approach has been declared here in this podcast and in every conversation that I've had with you, what I plan to have with others around. And I somewhere believe that, at least for India and being India specific with respect to this, there is a large population of undiagnosed patients purely because, again, facilities are not adequate. The patients are suffering because of healthcare facilities, again, not being accessible, medication not being accessible. So I completely believe that prevention is the key, right, going forward for any illness. I'm not limiting myself only to rare diseases, but in case of rare diseases, it is unfathomable purely because of the medical treatment being inaccessible because of its price and cost. I know the government of India is trying its best to, come up with new generic drugs, even for rare diseases, but it's all going to take time. And every month, every day for that matter, children are being born, they are being diagnosed, and the parents that we meet, they come with their hand on their head and say, "I wish we knew about this screening option available." When I tell them that, didn't you know about this? So I think this is one thing that I want to take forward. I want to keep working on, so that everybody at least knows that there is an option available. With the help of corporates, if we can get these health camps rolled out for organizational employees, India has a huge IT, so workforce, which is, working for global projects all across the world. And I think we are sitting on a ticking time bomb if we are not going to do something about it, right? So somewhere that has been the whole angle of, having this conversation with you. If, let's say, an individual wants to access any kind of screening available, that they want to kind of avail from Mapmygenome, do you have centers across India? How does one go about it?
So I think there are two things. One is that some of our preventive tests are available anywhere FedEx and DoDart and others can reach. So you just place an order online, you get a kit in the mail, you take a sample and you send it. Now, that can be done even for like a Mapmygenome and others. We just need a little bit more of your DNA that is there. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about was also that we've been creating a resource page for people to educate people. And over there, you can search by gene name, you can search by condition, you can search by a test or others to find out more about that. And so from there, we can then, you click on whatever you know, you search for whatever you know, you find the product that you are looking for. And then if you have questions, you talk to our team that either on WhatsApp or otherwise, and then we'll arrange a pickup, right? So if it's a blood test, then typically we would arrange for a blood pickup from your home. Or if you are, if it is a kit, then typically whether it's a microbiome or epigenome or others, most of these are through test kit that we are able to send. So if it is a saliva based, easy to send. Blood based, mostly we would arrange a phlebo pickup, even though we can potentially take blood sample also through right blood spots. So there are many ways. You don't have to go anywhere. I think we will come to you, right? So ultimately, I think that's the message I want to get, that it's not difficult to get it anywhere in the country. They would be
Right.
able to get access to that.
So some of the corporates have, even given us the option, can we have like a,
Camp.
screening camp, yeah, inside their
Yes.
campuses. Does that sound
Absolutely.
as something doable, or would you need extra volunteers from anywhere? Do you think that we as, patient advocacy groups can come forward and support you?
Uh,
What do you think would be the perfect combination to make that happen?
I think that would be great, because we don't really have the bandwidth to go to every corporate or to spread the word. And I think it would be great if there's a way that we can work together to spread the awareness, to be able to create that amongst the corporate community, because I think it's right now the lack of awareness of what this can actually end up with, right? So I think it would be really helpful.
My sincere request to everybody hearing is that if you are a corporate, if you have any number of employees working with you, please get this incorporated in your medical health checkup checklist, and in either in tandem with your insurance provider, or if you can fund it yourself, nothing like it, but make this a part of the employee well-being checklist, because somewhere I believe that you're not just going to be preventing rare diseases, but a whole lot of other incidences which can be easily checked. Anu, thank you so much for your time. Is there absolutely anything else that you would want to share with us before we go? Otherwise, I am very, very grateful for the time that you've given me today.
Thank you, Monisha. I think thank you for creating, the community that you are creating. I know it started as a personal, initiative that you did, but I think it is creating a lot more for many families that are looking to find solutions. So thank you for that. And I think we've been talking about prevention, and I think one line that I often use is that prevention is not only better than cure. I think in most cases, prevention is the cure.